ancestors in the reading passage, and then you can see the word Africa. Your best answer is true. Look at statement 2. Ancestors of the Aborigines migrated to Australia about 80,000 years ago. Again, circle or underline the key words. Keywords are probably migrated and the number 80,000. So scan now in the reading passage to find a synonym for migrated and numbers. Scan very quickly and you find the information there in 2 places. Read it again very carefully. Ancestors of the Aborigines migrated to Australia about 80,000 years ago. So as you look at paragraph 2, it says some migrated to Australia around 50,000 years ago. The question 2 is false. Now look at question 3. Again, read it and underline or circle the key words. The north of Australia was the most attractive area of the country for the earliest settlers. Key words that we're looking for: north of Australia and attractive. And as you quickly look, you'll find in paragraph 3 that it talks about the northern part of Australia. But look at the question again. Does it actually say if the northern part of Australia was the most attractive area or not? And there's no information about whether it was attractive or not. No information in the reading passage, so your best answer is not given. And as a general rule, anytime you cannot find any information about the question in the reading passage, your best answer is not given. Now, masterclass advice then is always read the questions first. Find out what you have to do and then use the right reading skill to find the information that you need. As I said before, the readings are all intended for a general audience. So if there are any specific technical words, technical vocabulary, there will probably be some kind of help for you. So look for, first of all, if there's a difficult word, try to figure out what it means from the context, from the sentence itself, maybe the sentence before or the sentence after. Also, look for a footnote. There might be an explanation in a footnote at the bottom of the page. There might be a diagram with labels that might help you. And look for words like, for example, such as, for instance, and like, because these words introduce examples. And very often, if you can understand what the example is, then that helps you to understand what the word means. Be aware that some of the questions have a word limit. It might say, write no more than 3 words and or a number. Now be very careful with these word limit questions, because if you write 4 words and the instructions say no more than 3 words, then the answer is wrong, even if the information is correct. If the question says write no more than 2 words and or a number, and you write 3 words, again, that would be marked wrong. So please pay careful attention to any word limit questions. Now, it's important that you pace yourself during the test, and I recommend that you think of the reading test as 3 20-minute reading tests and not one 1-hour test. Pace yourself through the test. Allow yourself about 20 minutes on each. Now, the reason for this is it may be true that the second and the third reading passages are more difficult. However, there are easier questions on each of the 3 reading passages. So it's really important that you answer all of those easier questions. Now, you've got 40 questions to answer in total in 60 minutes. That's about 1.5 minutes per question. Therefore, don't waste time on any difficult question that you get stuck on. It's much better to answer the easier questions, mark up the difficult ones, and go back later and make a good educated guess. Never, never, never leave blanks. There's no negative marking in IELTS, so it's always better to make a good guess than it is to leave any blanks. The raw score that you get out of 40 is correlated to an IELTS band score. For example, if you're taking academic reading and you want to get a band 7, you need about 30 correct out of 40. You know, if you want a band 5 on academic IELTS, you only need about 15 questions correct. So again, be encouraged, because that's 15 questions out of the 40. And as I've said, make sure that you move through the test and try to find and answer all of those easier questions. For general training, if you're looking for a band 6, you need about 34 correct out of 40. Now that correlation chart is up there on the website, so do have a look for more specific information there. I will take your reading questions later, so hold on to those for now. And let me move on to my advice about the speaking part of the test. Now, as I said before, academic and general training reading tests are different, but the speaking test is the same for everybody, both academic and general training. Let's begin, first of all, though, with our first poll to do with the speaking test. So how often do you use English at home when chatting about things such as food, hobbies, and sport? Can you put in your answer now, please? Every day, 2 or 3 times a week, once a week, or rarely? We'll come back to those results shortly. So once again, let's look now at the composition of the two tests, the composition of the components of the tests, and you can see highlighted here the speaking test. Lasts between 11 and 14 minutes, so it's very quick, and is divided into 3 very different parts. I just want to mention the advantages of having a speaking test, which allows for some genuine communication between yourself and the examiner. It's a real life interaction with a well-trained examiner. This is much better than some other tests where you maybe have to speak to a computer and record something. Be aware that the examiners are listening for different language skills in each part of the test. So in part 1, it lasts between 4 and 5 minutes, and you'll have some more easy, familiar type questions to answer. And here the examiner is looking to see how well you can talk about yourself, what you like and what you dislike. And you can keep your answers fairly short, just a few sentences. In part 2, here you're going to be given a topic, a piece of paper and a pencil, and you'll be given 1 minute to make a few notes, if you want to, on a specific topic, and then you'll have up to 2 minutes to give an organized talk to the examiner. And here the examiner is looking to see how well you can talk about a topic for up to 2 minutes, how well you can organize and then present this short talk. In part 3 of the test, always on a related topic to part 2, this is a more general discussion between you and the examiner. Again, it lasts between 4 and 5 minutes. And here the examiner is assessing how well you can participate in a conversation, in a 2-way discussion with the examiner. Now, all of the IELTS speaking tests are recorded, Don't let that worry you at all. Please don't be nervous about that. That's just for standardization and for in case there's a need to double mark the test, for example. And also just be aware that the examiners have to keep to specific timing for each part of the test as well. So if they interrupt you, you haven't done anything wrong, just relax. And you don't have to worry about the time at all. That's entirely the examiner's responsibility. So let's look then at how you're going to be scored on your IELTS speaking test. And this is where I'm going to refer you now in your reading, speaking and listening webinar booklet to page 10. You can turn now to those speaking assessment criteria, and you'll see across the top you've got 4 column headings, and then up the left side you've got the IELTS 9-band scale. So the examiners will be giving you 4 scores, and each one is equally weighted. Now, what the examiners are doing as they are interviewing you is assessing your speaking ability and matching your spoken performance to these band descriptors, okay? Now, as I said, each of the 4 scores counts for 25% of your overall score. Now, the first area that you'll be scored on is fluency and coherence. So the examiners are looking to see how well and how easily you can keep talking without long pauses and hesitations. And they're looking at the way that you use connecting words and signaling words to make the relationships between your ideas clear. The second area is lexical resource, and they're looking for 2 areas. They're looking for the range or variety of language that you're using, and they're looking at the accuracy of your vocabulary as well. So generally, they're looking to see how precisely you can use your vocabulary without repeating the same words. And can you use an appropriate style? Can you use some less common vocabulary? And those of you that are aiming for those higher band scores, band 7 and above, you need to be using a good variety of idiomatic language and collocations. When I say collocations, I mean the kinds of words and phrases that naturally go together in English. Remember at the beginning, I advised you to be listening to English in authentic context, real context, by listening to movies, films, listening to songs if you like music, and so on. So, and I would recommend that you start keeping a vocabulary dictionary, if you like, of idiomatic expressions. Learn what they mean and then practice using them in your spoken English. So that's the second area that you'll be scored on. The third area is grammatical range and accuracy. So the examiners are looking to see really 2 areas. Again, the range or variety of different types of spoken sentences, as well as the accuracy of your grammar as well. So that includes all of your verb tenses, articles, prepositions, and so on. And finally, last but not least, this is a speaking test, so you will get a score for your pronunciation. Now, this is where I do need to mention accent, because everybody has an accent depending on what our first language is, maybe where we've lived in the world, and so on. An accent is not a problem. I have an accent. Everybody has an accent. And it doesn't say anywhere in the band descriptors that you have to have a British accent or a Canadian accent to get a band 9 in pronunciation. You don't. Now, it's true that the examiners are looking for certain technical skills to do with stress and intonation and rhythm and so on. But basically, what they're looking for is how clearly you can communicate your ideas and information in English. So that's what the examiners are going to rate you on. So let's just go back now to our first poll. See if my moderator has got the results there. I think he does. How often do you use English at home when chatting about things such as food, hobbies, and sport? And again, the biggest group, 33%, have answered rarely. Second biggest group, 29%, said every day. Next biggest group, 23%, said 2 or 3 times a week, and 16% said once a week. Let me again recommend you try to practice speaking English as much as you can. As you're preparing for your IELTS test, try to immerse yourself in as much English as possible. And if you have nobody to speak to, you know, it's even better than nothing, to think in English. That can be very helpful for you as well. Now, here you've got the band descriptors, the speaking assessment criteria. As I mentioned, that's on page 10 in your booklet. So I would like you to be looking at that now. And we're going to listen to part 3 of an IELTS speaking test here. A young man called Hendrik. And what I'd like you to do is look at the speaking assessment criteria on page 10. And as you watch this part 3 video clip, I want you to imagine that you're the examiner for the moment. What band score do you believe that Hendrik was awarded? And then afterwards, we'll look at the examiner's scores and comments. Here we go.
Now, we've been talking about a well-known person you like or admire, and I'd like to discuss with you 1 or 2 more general questions related to this. Let's consider, first of all, famous people in your country. So in Germany, what kind of people are famous?
Mostly sports people, I would say. Like, our favorite sport is soccer, so yeah, people who play this sport. Famous as well are politicians, but they are not admired, or they're not liked or anything.
So there's
like
a difference between being famous and being admired.
I think so, I definitely think so, yeah.
And politicians are only famous.
They are only famous because it's easy to blame them for everything what happens. At the moment we have the financial crisis in Europe, especially Greece and Ireland really have to suffer at the moment. And yeah, it's easy to blame something. You can't blame a soccer player, but it's easy to blame the politicians.
How about movie stars? Are they also famous in Germany?
Yeah, they're also famous, but not the German movie stars or music stars. We don't have a big, a big branch of this. More, American, mostly U.S. American movie stars. But it's hard to, it's hard to think that they are our role models, anything like that. They're living on the other side of the lake, and yeah, they're just in the television.
What about in the past? What kinds of people were famous in the past?
Especially in the 70s, 60s, I would say musicians, because of this freedom, of this lifestyle we had there. Yeah, these musicians who lived this.
And how about the future? Can you give me a prediction for the future?
Definitely not bankers.
Not bankers.
Yeah, because of the financial crisis again. Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe people who serve the planet and who wants to save the planet, work for this. So environmentally people, would be quite likely because we have this theme of global warming at the moment. It's well discussed, and so I would say this could be likely.
Now let's talk about celebrity culture. Often famous people are used in advertisements. Can you give me some examples of that?
I don't watch a lot of television, but television or see advertisements, so I can't give many examples actually.
Well, how about for instead of for products, how about celebrities being involved in advertising for causes or charities? Have you seen examples of that?
Yeah, sometimes like for environmentally things. I can't name any celebrities, but it's quite often that they use this image. A celebrity has done something in his life and many people admire him for the one or the other reason. So it's quite a good thing that they use a celebrity because he as a role model, stands for something, and he stands for the environment or maybe for a product. So the people who admires him, wants to buy this product, wants to do something for the environment.
Now let's change to the negatives. What kind of possible negative effects might a celebrity have on younger generations?
Yeah, as I said, they are role models for many people. And this rugby star who was in the television the last weeks and months, go on the wrong path and taking drugs or just living the wrong lifestyle, then the young people think, hey, it's cool what he's doing. So he's famous, he has money, he's taking drugs, so hey, that fits together. I want to do the same.
So you think that his behavior actually can influence how younger generations choose to lead their lives?
I definitely think so, yeah.
So do you think that a celebrity has a moral responsibility to behave in a better manner in public?
As long as he is famous, as he is in everyday life, he definitely has. He's not only the normal person. If he is at home, it's okay what he's doing. I don't care. But at the very moment he goes public or is in television or in the newspapers, he definitely has a responsibility because millions of people are watching what he is doing.
So would you say that there's an obligation that a person who becomes famous, they have an obligation to behave in a more ethical or moral manner?
Yeah, and if he can't stand this pressure, then he should take care that he's not being famous. No, somehow. I don't know whether it's possible somehow, but there is this obligation definitely.
Well, thank you very much. That's the end of the speaking test.
Thank you.
All right then, so what did you think of Hendrik? Why don't you type in the score so my moderator can see what score you believe he should have been awarded? Io, I'm hearing a 7 from Io, my moderator. Okay, let's see what the examiner had to say. Yes, band 7. Okay, well done. I think there's quite a few examiners out there. I'll make some of you examiners. All right then, so fluency and coherence, first of all. Well, the examiner said yes, this candidate, Hendrik, he can keep the flow of speech going. He can keep talking without any noticeable effort, and he doesn't lose coherence either. He doesn't lose track of what he's saying. He uses a good variety of linking words and markers. For example, he says, I would say, that's a good question, as I said, as long as. So those are some nice linking words, but he does tend to overuse yeah, and sometimes his referencing is not accurate. He says, for the one or the other reasons. It would be correct to say, for one reason or another. But he does good enough to get that band 7. Lexical resource, yes, he's a 7 here as well. The examiner says, yes, he uses a good wide range of vocabulary, and he's got some less common words and some nice idioms and collocations. Remember that word from before? Collocations, words and phrases that naturally go together in English. For example, he says, easy to blame, global warming, financial crisis. He stands for something, can't stand the pressure. Those are nice expressions, they're very natural sounding. Remember I said before, if you're aiming for that band 7 or above, you need to be using this natural idiomatic language. Sometimes though, he lacks a bit of precision in his word choice. He says the word Greek instead of Greece. He says on the other side of the lake, an environmentally people, which is not correct. A big branch was rather simplistic there as well. But overall, he does well enough in vocabulary to get a band 7 in lexical resource. Grammatical range and accuracy, same thing. Band 7, he's got a good range of simple and complex sentence types. Now, I'll go into a bit more detail about that when I talk about the writing test a little later today. But he's got a good mix of both simple and complex types of sentences. Many of his sentences have no mistakes, but he makes one or two errors though. He makes a few mistakes in subject-verb agreement. He says people who wants. To be correct, he should say people who want. He says the people who admires. He should say the people who admire. He's got a few mistakes with articles. He says the normal person instead of a normal person, and a few relative pronoun mistakes. He says everything what happens instead of everything that happens. But he does well enough to get a band 7 in grammatical range and accuracy. Pronunciation also a band 7. Overall, his pronunciation is clear and it's quite easy to follow. He uses sentence stress and intonation quite effectively to help convey meaning. For example, he says, you can't blame a soccer player, but it's easy to blame the politicians. Nice use of stress there. He's got quite a noticeable accent though, doesn't he? And he does mispronounce a few words that results in a bit of a lack of clarity. He says, for example, role model instead of role model, wrong instead of wrong, and surf the planet instead of serve the planet. But overall, it doesn't have very much impact on clarity. And overall, he does well enough there to get that band 7 in pronunciation. All right then, so my masterclass advice then for the speaking test is try to surround yourself in as much English as you can as you're preparing for the test. Surround yourself in English from the media, films, television, and so on. Authentic English as much as you can. And I do want to recommend that you become familiar with different accents as well, so make sure that you're familiar with British, Canadian, Australian, American accents, and so on. Some people think that the faster you speak, the higher your score. Well, that's not true. Not too fast, not too slow. You should aim for a nice, steady pace. And sometimes, if we're a bit nervous, we tend to speak a bit too quickly. So if that applies to you, just slow down and speak at a nice, steady pace and focus on speaking as clearly as you can. In part 2 of the speaking test, you're given 1 minute to prepare your talk. And I strongly recommend that you do write down a few keywords, maybe a list of keywords or expressions or ideas, just to help organize what you're going to say. And then you definitely don't have time to write complete sentences, so don't do that. But just a list of keywords, I think, can really be effective in helping you to keep talking. And ideally, you want to keep talking for the full 2 minutes, if you possibly can. Keep talking until the examiner stops you. If you run out of ideas, the last bullet point on the card, the topic card in front of you in the speaking test, is about, it asks you to explain something. So if you run out of ideas, that one is often the one where you can think, you can think of more things to talk about. Try to use some natural fillers if you can. Now, especially if you have a tendency to say things like, yes, like, Yanni, this kind of thing. If you're using those fillers, practice using some more natural sounding ones instead. Things like, now let me think about that. Now that's an interesting question. Because these kind of things can sound quite natural, and also it buys you a little bit of time as well, while you think to yourself, oh my goodness, how do I answer that question? When it comes to intonation, sometimes it can help a little bit if you try to smile a little bit, while you're speaking, because it does tend to lift your intonation and stops you from sounding quite so flat. And that can be helpful to you. And, if you make a grammar mistake, Don't worry about it too much. You can fix it if you want to, or otherwise just keep on going. Just think about Hendrik. You know, he made a few mistakes, but he just kept on going, and he didn't allow a few mistakes to interfere with his performance. Generally, though, just try to smile and relax during the test. The examiners are very nice, and they really do want you to do the best job that you can. Let's move on then, and we'll talk about the listening test. If you've got questions about the speaking test, hold on to them. I will answer them shortly. The listening test. So just like the speaking test, the listening test is the same for both academic and general training candidates. And you can see here up on the screen, the listening test lasts 30 minutes. You've got 4 listening sections. It's all audio, not video, it's audio. And you've got a total of 40 questions to answer. Now, I'm sorry to say, you're only going to hear the recordings once. It would be nice to listen to them as many times as you want to, but that's not going to happen. You can only hear the recordings once. And something else that's important is that when you're listening, write your answers in the listening question booklet, because they'll give you an extra 10 minutes at the end of that last listening, an extra 10 minutes to copy your answers from the question booklet onto the answer sheet. The 4 listening sections become increasingly more difficult. So in other words, the first listening is the easiest. And the reason for that is because those of you that are aiming for the higher band scores need to be able to demonstrate your stronger listening skills. Again, just like with the reading test, there's a variety of different types of questions, so make sure that you're familiar with those. For example, there are gap-fill questions, maybe matching words to diagrams and tables. There's sentence completion, short answer questions, and so on. Once again, up on the IDP IELTS website, there's practice there, there's audio listening, practice questions with the transcripts and the answers as well to help you prepare. Now, I'd like you please to turn in your webinar booklet to page 6. And you'll see there's a listening sample questions from section 2 of the listening test. You'll need a pen or a pencil, if you can have one handy. And we're going to do a practice listening activity here in section 2, questions 11 through 20. Look at the instructions. Did you notice it says write no more than 3 words and or a number? Remember how important it is to notice these word limit questions. So here, if you write 4 words or more, the answer is automatically wrong. So please be very careful with those questions. Now, do you remember what we did before in the reading section? We identified keywords in the questions, and then we found synonyms or words with similar meanings in the reading passage. Remember that? Well, that's basically the same thing that we're going to do in the listening section. We're going to identify keywords in the questions, in the question booklet, and then we're going to listen for similar words or synonyms in the recording. So look at question 11. It says well known for. Now, what's another word for well known? I'm looking at you. Do we have any answers there from the group? Another word for well known? That's right, famous, right? So that you've thought of a synonym, yeah, for well known. You're thinking, okay, famous is a synonym. And sure enough, I think you'll see that the word famous is what you hear in the recording, yeah? And you're looking for a noun. I know that because the question says well known for blank. So you know that it's got to be a noun or a noun phrase. That's how we're going to approach it. Now, what I want to emphasize to you now is that your best friend on test day is the power of prediction in the listening test. The more you can predict what you're going to hear, the better you can do on the test. Now, you'll be given time before each of the listening tests, each of the listening sections, to read the questions first. So I want you to do that. Read the questions and try to predict what kind of information you have to listen for. Underline or circle keywords in the question booklet. Let's look at, for example, after number 11, it says the complex, so that's the National Arts Centre. The complex consists of, and then you've got a list of things: concert rooms, theatres, cinemas, art galleries, public library, restaurants, and number 12. Now, all those things in the list are what? They're all places or facilities in the National Arts Centre. Therefore, you can predict that number 12 is also a facility, a place in the National Arts Centre. Look at, for example, look at number 16, open. Number 16, blank days per year. So what kind of information are you looking for here? It's got to be a number, hasn't it? And again, you see how that will help you to focus more accurately. Now, it's important to know that all the information that you hear on the recording is in the same order as the questions in the question booklet. So you've got to keep up with the recording. At the bottom of page 6, questions 17 to 20 ask you to complete the table. And again, you've got the same word limit question. Write no more than 3 words and or a number. Anytime you've got a table like this, look at the column headings. That tells you what information to listen for, doesn't it? So venue, for example, for number 17, venue is a place, a location. So that's what you're going to focus on when you get to that point in the recording. All right then, I've talked enough. Are you ready? Pen or pencil in hand? Looking at page 6 in the booklet. Here we go. Listen, fill in the missing information.
Section 2. You will hear a radio broadcast called Focus on the Arts. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Hello, and welcome to Focus on the Arts. I'm your host, Dave Green, and this is your very own local radio programme. Every Friday evening, we put the spotlight on different arts and culture facilities and look at the shows and events that are on offer in the coming week. And today, the focus is on the National Arts Centre. Now, if you don't already know it yourself, I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's famous throughout the world as one of the major venues for classical music. But did you know that it's actually much more than just a place to hear concerts? The centre itself is a huge complex that caters for a great range of arts. Under a single roof, it houses concert rooms, theatres, cinemas, art galleries, and a wonderful public library, as well as service facilities including 3 restaurants and a bookshop. So, at any one time, the choice of entertainment there is simply enormous. So, how did they manage to build such a big arts complex right in the heart of the city? Well, the area was completely destroyed by bombs during the war in 1940. So the opportunity was taken to create a cultural centre that would be what they called the city's gift to the nation. Of course, it took a while for such a big project to get started, but it was planned in the 60s, built in the 70s, and eventually opened to the public in 1983. Ever since then, it has proved to be a great success. It's not privately owned, like many arts centres, but is still in public hands. It's run by the City Council. Both our National Symphony Orchestra and National Theatre Company were involved in the planning of the project, and they're now based there, giving regular performances every week. And as the centre is open 363 days of the year, there are plenty of performances to choose from.
Before you hear the rest of the broadcast, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
So, to give you some idea of what's on, and to help you choose from the many possibilities, we've made a selection of the star attractions. If you're interested in classical music, then we recommend you go along to the National on either Monday or Tuesday evening at 7:30 for a spectacular production of The Magic Flute, probably the most popular of all Mozart's operas. It's in the Garden Hall, and tickets start at only £8, but you'll have to be early if you want to get them that cheap. And remember, it's only on for those 2 evenings. For those more interested in the cinema, you might like to see the new Canadian film, which is showing on Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. in Cinema 2, and that's called 3 Lives. It's had fantastic reviews, and tickets cost just £4.50, which is a reduction on the usual price of £5.50. So it's really good value, especially for such a great movie. But you can see the centre's main attraction at the weekend, because on Saturday and Sunday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m, they're showing a wonderful new exhibition that hasn't been seen anywhere else in Europe yet. It's a collection of Chinese art called Faces of China. That's in Gallery 1, and it has some really fascinating paintings and sculptures by leading artists from all over China. And the good news is that it's completely free, so don't miss it. So why not go along to the National Arts Centre next week for one or all of these great events? And you can always pick up a programme and check out all the other performances and exhibitions on offer, or coming soon, on almost every day of the year. Next week, we'll be looking at the new Museum of Science.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
All right then, so how do you think you did there? I'm sure you did well. Let's go ahead and check your answers. So question 11, well known for, now you could say concerts, or music concerts, or classical music concerts, or classical music. So any of those answers would be correct. Remember, the word limit is no more than 3 words and or a number. So if you said something like wonderful classical music concerts, that would be 4 words, and that would be wrong, wouldn't it? Question 12 was bookshop. You heard. Remember that the I in IELTS stands for International English, so if you use the American word bookstore, that's fine as well. Number 13, the centre was planned. Now, this is where I've got to mention spelling, and I'm sorry to say, but spelling is important on the IELTS test. So if you spell planned with 1 N, I'm sorry, that would be wrong. It would actually sound like planed. That would be a different word. Number 13 is planned. Number 14, opened to the public. So your best answer then is 1980s, or the 1980s, or 1983. So any of those are good answers. Number 15, City Council, or the City Council. Now I need to mention capital letters. It doesn't matter here in IELTS on the listening test whether you use capital letters or not. It doesn't matter. And finally, number 16, 363 days per year. Over to that next section. Question 17, the venue was Garden Hall or the Garden Hall. Again, capital letters, doesn't matter whether you capitalize or not in the listening test. Number 18, the event there was 3 Lives. 3 Lives. It doesn't matter whether you wrote the word 3, T-H-R-E-E, or you use the number 3. Doesn't make any difference. but it is plural, lives, L-I-V-E-S. So it's got to be plural there to be correct. Number 19, the ticket price was £4.50, £4.50. And the currency symbol there is important as well. And finally, the event in number 20, Faces of China. Okay, again, faces is plural with an S. If it was singular, it would sound like face. This is plural, Faces of China. Again, it doesn't matter whether you capitalize faces and China or not. That's not important. But the spelling is important. So if you wrote phases, P-H-A-S-E-S, that would be wrong, I'm sorry. Phases is a different word, pronounced differently. That's when the moon changes shape. Okay, this is Faces of China. All right then, well, I hope everybody did a good job there. Let me wrap up here with my masterclass advice for the listening test. But first of all, as we just practiced, make sure you take the time to read the questions carefully before each of the listenings. Underline or circle the key words and try to predict. As I've said, try to predict the kind of information that you need to listen for, because that will help you to focus much better. Try to think of some synonyms as well to help you predict the content. So, for example, let's say you're reading the questions at the beginning of section 3 or section 4, and you see that it's all to do with the topic of global warming. Well, start brainstorming, thinking of vocabulary words that you know on that topic. You might think of temperatures rising, ice melting, sea waters rising, you know, all of this kind of language. It can be helpful because it activates your brain, you know, and helps prepare you as well for what you're going to hear. As I've said, the questions in the booklet are in the same order as the information that you hear on the recording. So you've got to keep up with the recording. Keep up. If you miss a question, don't panic. Okay, try not to panic anyway. Keep up with the recording. Remember, you'll always have time later to go back and make a good guess. But just like with the reading test, never, never, never leave any blanks. It's always better to make a guess rather than leave a blank. Remember to keep to the word limit. And when you copy your answers over from the question booklet to the answer sheet, make sure you don't copy over any little extra words, because every word counts. Even the little words like an, the, of, in, at, every word counts. So when it says no more than 3 words and or a number, remember that in those 3 words, words like in, on, at, etc., those words all count as one word. And finally, remember that the intonation of the speakers in the conversations can be very helpful to you, because that can help you to understand if the speakers generally feel positive towards the topic under conversation or not. So that brings me then to the end of part 1 of today's webinar. I'm going to just, as I wrap up the first section here, I'm just going to go over with you a few things that you can do, a few other IDP IELTS resources that can be very helpful to you. And I'm going to take some questions from you as well about the reading, speaking, and listening tests. Questions. Let me check with my moderator over here for some questions. And I have to say, in my webinar last month, I had so many questions, and I had a couple of people complaining at me, Marilyn, you didn't answer my question. So let me apologize in advance. If I don't get to answer your question now, please send it to our Facebook page, and I will answer you there tomorrow, okay? All right, here we go. Are there any minus scores? That's from Cameron. No, there's no minus scores, no negative marking anywhere on the IELTS test. Question from Mustafa. Where are the idioms that are used in the listening part? Idioms are more likely to be in the conversational sections of the listening test. You get some monologues where one person is speaking, and then you also have some conversations as well. A question here. A question from, my goodness, the questions are coming in so fast, I can't read them. In speaking, from Saad, in speaking, what should we consider most important? Overall, I would say as you're approaching the speaking test, try to be as relaxed as you can coming in, because I think nervousness can impact you. So some general tips would be, I mean, I think in general for your IELTS test, make sure exactly that you know where the test is being held. If it was me, I would recommend you actually drive there the day before if you're not sure. Make sure you know how much time it's going to take, how bad the traffic is on the way there. Do you know where to park your car? You know, these kinds of things, so that you can get in plenty of time. You don't want to come rushing in. And in fact, if you're at all late, you won't be allowed in at all. So those kind of things I think are important. Get a good night's sleep the night before your IELTS test, and make sure you have some breakfast in the morning as well. That gives your brain some power as well. Question from Yuvajit. If in the reading test, is it helpful if we start with the last reading passage? The last reading passage is the more difficult one. I think it's entirely up to you whether you want to start with the more difficult passage and then go on to the easier ones. I think what's most essential, though, is that you pace yourself, as I said before, 20 minutes on each of the three reading passages, I think is the best strategy to take. Question there from Wilson. In listening, are they all British speakers? No, they're not. You can in IELTS is international English, so be prepared to listen to British, Canadian, American, Australian accents. Question here. My goodness, the questions are coming in so fast. From Miroslava, will it be a mistake if I use American pronunciation in the speaking test? No, not at all. It doesn't make any difference. Does not make any difference what kind of pronunciation you have, whether you speak more American or Canadian, Australian or British. It doesn't make any difference at all. Speak with as you normally do, Accent is not a problem. It's more about how clearly you can communicate. Question from Azia Huda, should we use proverbs while speaking? Does it bring a higher score? No, I wouldn't recommend using proverbs. I recommend using natural sounding language, natural idioms and collocations that you've picked up from listening to authentic English as much as possible. From Shar Al-Amri, in part 2 of the speaking test, if I don't know a word that I should talk about, what should I do? Yes, good question there. If you don't know a word on the speaking test, ask the examiner what it means. And they will explain it to you as briefly as possible or give you a synonym. If you don't ask, they can't offer to help. But if you do ask, then they will help you. It'll not hurt your score, I mean, unless you do it all the way through, you know. But just occasionally, that's fine. Just ask if you're not sure. From Babak Jahani, is it possible to change the topic in the speaking test part 2 if I'm unfamiliar with it? It's not a good idea to do that. You don't want to give the impression to the examiner that you can only talk about certain topics. Rest assured that all the topics on the IELTS speaking test are very general. And so, you know, there's no specialist topics at all. And if it happens to be something that you're not interested in, like maybe it's, I don't know, football or playing, you know, music or something, well, you know, you can still talk about it. You can say, well, you know, I'm not interested in the topic personally. However, you know, and then you can go on and answer the questions. Question about writing, I'll deal with that later. Question from Amireza Jalili, is a plural noun with an S at the end, is that important in the listening test? Yes, grammatically, if the sentence requires a plural noun, then you've got to be correct to pluralize it. It just depends on the context, of course. It depends on the sentence itself. Question here, should we take notes during the speaking test? That's from Aino Ashrafi. Yes, in part 2 of the speaking test, I do recommend that you make a list of keywords or ideas to help organize what you're going to say in part 2. Question from, I think this is from Mohammed. Although I know all the vocabulary required to be used in the gaps, why do I always miss some of them in the recording? Please advise. I think my advice there is, as I've talked about earlier in the listening test, read the questions very carefully first and try to predict as much as you can the kind of information that you're going to listen for. Underline, circle keywords, and then, you know, focus as much as you can on the kind of information that you need to listen for, whether it's a number or whatever. From Wilson, can we use pen or pencil? You have to use pencil. Can you give me a tip to help me with matching headings in the reading section, please? That's from Hind Mohammed. Yes, with the headings in the reading section, again, it's the same strategy. Focus in on the keywords in the headings, and then you're going to try to skim through the reading passage, looking for synonyms that match that heading. And that's the best strategy. From Mustafa Khalil, yeah, nice question. Can I make some jokes in the speaking test? I like your question there, Mustafa. You know, it's a funny idea, perhaps, but you know, maybe not the best place to try out your jokes. I like your question, but maybe not. From Nassim, do we lose marks if we talk between 1 and 2 minutes for speaking part 2? My advice is, if you possibly can, try to talk for the full 2 minutes. And as I've said before, what's helpful is to have taken, make a list of keywords, key ideas that will kind of help you to keep talking. If you can't talk for a full 2 minutes, okay. But it's better, certainly better if you can. From Mustafa, bookstore, 1 word, or bookstore, 2 words, both of them get the mark. Yes, as long as both are acceptable. From Hamid Al-Sulaimi, I'm having only a short time to prepare for IELTS. Please, I need your advice. Hamid, it depends how much time you've got. I recommend that you go up to our website, practice some of the questions up there. And in fact, I'm going to move on right now and talk just a little bit about some of the IDP IELTS support tools that can help you. You may have time, for example, to do the Reading Assist, Speaking Assist, or the Writing Assist as well. And this is where you can, you go to our website, you can practice a reading, speaking, or writing test, sample test, send it in here to IDP, and one of our IELTS specialists will mark it up and send you a report telling you what you're doing well and where you're making mistakes and how you can improve. I'd strongly recommend that you do one of the assist products from IDP. Just a few things very quickly. And by the way, there are so many questions. I do apologize, and there just isn't time for me to answer all of your questions live right now. Please post those questions on our Facebook page, and I will take the time to answer you tomorrow, okay? Just a few things very quickly. Events that IDP is organizing. We have our IELTS Ask the Expert on Facebook Live, a 1-hour presentation. Again, you can ask your questions there and one of our experts will answer you live. You can see the dates there. These are on Tuesday evenings from 7 to 8 o'clock in the evening, Dubai time. So if you're not in the UAE, just be aware it's 7 o'clock Dubai time. And you can see there, that's on our IDP IELTS Facebook page right there. Next one coming up, August 15th, focusing on the reading and the listening test. Hope to see you there. Those of you that are registered to take your IELTS test with IDP in the UAE, we have our face-to-face IELTS Masterclass, which is basically the same content as I'm doing here today, at the IDP Roadshow in Dubai on the 29th of September. There are 2 sessions there. That will be me, I believe. And on September 30th in Abu Dhabi, another of our IELTS experts there live at the Beach Rotana Hotel next to the Abu Dhabi Mall. Also, we have our Countdown to IELTS presentations, our free 3-hour workshop for registered test takers. You can see the dates here in Dubai. These are on Fridays, 11th and 18th of August, 1st and 15th of September, from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And in Abu Dhabi on the 11th and 25th of August, 8th and 29th of September in Abu Dhabi there from 4:30 to 7:30. Those of you in Saudi Arabia, we have IELTS Masterclasses coming up in Riyadh at the Al Faisal University campus on the 12th of August, coming up soon, 16th of September and 21st of October from 2:30 to 4:30. In Jeddah, University of Business and Technology, 12th of August, 30th of September, 21st of October. And in Dammam, 12th of August, 16th of September, and 21st of October. So those events coming up there. We also have our test prep IELTS focus workshops currently being held in Riyadh. We have 8 modules here. Each one is a 4-hour workshop where you can learn all about the test and you'll have live practice there. That's held in Riyadh on the 16th of September. Contact the IDP Riyadh office if you're interested in that. And those of you in Cairo, we have our masterclass there 7th of October. And in Alexandria, October 6th. Events coming up in Turkey here, in Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir as well. So lots of live events coming up for you there. Let's move on then, and that brings us to part 2 of our IDP IELTS webinar this afternoon. For those of you that are just joining, my name is Marilyn Cleland, and I'm joining you today from the IDP IELTS regional office here in Dubai. Welcome. If you have any technical issues, please use that raise hand icon to alert my moderator that you need some assistance. And let's focus now on the writing component of the IELTS test. In this session, you're going to gain some practical tips, learn how you'll be scored by the writing examiners. I'm going to help you avoid making some big mistakes. During the webinar, there is a Q&A panel, so please do type your questions in there. And I have to say, you know, we have close to 400 people attending today, so again, I'm apologizing, but I just can't answer everybody's questions, but please send them. If your question doesn't get answered today, please send your questions in to our Facebook page. We have live polling in the webinar, and I'll instruct you to put your answers in to our live polls during this session. And you should have, I hope, downloaded your Masterclass webinar pack. Masterclass webinar pack, which has some very useful information for you, and I'm going to be referring to that then this afternoon in the writing webinar. The aims of the session then, I want to encourage you all to work on your English a little every day. Even 20 minutes a day makes a difference. I'm going to focus then on the writing test now, looking at how the IELTS is assessed by the writing examiners. I'm going to highlight the important language skills that the examiners are looking for, and I'm going to point out the big mistakes that people tend to make on the IELTS test. Just be aware that there are the two versions of IELTS, academic and general training. So if you're not entirely sure which test you should be taking, speak directly with the people that you have to give your test report form to, and they will advise you if you have to take academic or general training and what band score you need. Remember, it's not IELTS, it's not IDP that decides that. It's the people that you're giving your test report form to. Now, you can see the components here of the writing test. Somebody wants to take a break. I'm getting a question here from my moderator. Somebody wants to take a break. Okay. When is the break? Yes, I sort of advertised upcoming events there during the break. My best advice is take a super quick break if you need to, but come back quickly because I'm continuing, okay? Yeah, yeah. I'm going to continue. If you missed something and you've got questions, as I've said, please send your questions to the end of the webinar, and if I don't answer them then, please send them to the Facebook page and I will answer them there for you, okay? All right then, so let's look at the academic writing test. First of all, the writing test is a 1-hour test. You've got 2 tasks, and in academic, you have to summarize some information that's given to you in a visual. It might be in a graph, a table, a chart, or a diagram. And you also have to write an essay where you give your opinion. On the general training test, it's also a 1-hour test. You also have 2 tasks to write, but your task 1 is completely different. In general training, task 1, you have to write a letter, and in task 2, you also have to write an essay giving your opinion. The topics are a little bit more practical and everyday in task 2. And you can use a rather more personal style for that general training task 2 essay as well. We'll talk about that more shortly. First of all, before we get into how to write really good task 1 and task 2 for academic and general training, I want to look at how you're going to be scored on your writing test. So can you now turn in your Masterclass webinar writing booklet to turn to page 17. In fact, you'll see the writing assessment criteria for task 1 are on page 17, and the assessment criteria for task 2 are on page 18. Now, you'll see across the top, you've got 4 columns, and up the left side, you've got the IELTS 9-band scale. So the writing examiners will give you 4 scores for task 1, and they'll give you 4 scores for task 2. So those 4 scores are equally weighted within task 1, and the 4 scores are equally weighted within task 2. The task 2 counts for twice as many marks as task 1, and that's why we recommend that you spend 20 minutes on task 1 and 40 minutes on task 2. Okay. Now, it doesn't matter which order you write the 2 tasks in. Some test takers like to do the task 2 essay first and then the task 1 at the end. That's fine, whatever you're comfortable with, but do keep that time division. 40 minutes on task 2 and 20 minutes on task 1. All right, so you're going to get 4 scores. The first one is for task achievement or task response. So what are the examiners looking for here? Well, they want to see how well and how fully you've answered the question on test day. So, for example, in academic task 1, they want to see how well you've summarized the main features from that graph or chart, written an overview to summarize the key information, how well you've supported those key points with the data, used the figures, the statistics, if they're given to you. In the task 2 essay for academic and general training, the examiners want to see how well you've answered the question prompt, if you've answered all parts of the prompt. And we'll look at that in more detail. So that's the first area, how well, how fully you've answered the question, task achievement. The second area is coherence and cohesion. So coherence is looking at the logical order of ideas and information. How easily can the examiner follow your ideas, the organization of your ideas? How well have you paragraphed the information? And cohesion is looking at the variety of linking words, connecting words and markers that you've used in your writing to show the relationships between ideas. The third area that you're scored on is lexical resource. As we talked about earlier on the speaking test, the examiners are looking for the variety of vocabulary words that you're using. The more variety, the better. And they're also looking for the accuracy of your word choices and usage of words as well. Remember, those of you that are looking for those higher band scores, band 7 and above, you need to be using a wide variety of language, using it precisely, using idiomatic language, natural sounding language as well, with good accuracy. The fourth area, of course, is grammatical range and accuracy. We discussed it a little bit before in the speaking test. Grammatical range, so they're looking for a variety of different types of sentences, both simple and complex sentences, as well as the accuracy of your grammar and punctuation. They're looking to see how well you can use verb tenses, articles, prepositions, are you punctuating appropriately, and so on. Let's look a little bit more at grammatical range and accuracy. And you can see there for band 7, it says grammatical range and accuracy band 7 uses a variety of complex structures, produces frequent error-free sentences, has good control of grammar and punctuation, but may make a few errors. So look at the first one, uses a variety of complex structures. What do I mean by complex structures? Well, let me give you a few examples. Sentences that have the word because, sentences with the word although, sentences that use a relative clause or adjective clause, words like which, who, that, when, where. Comparative structures, as well as more complex verb phrases, complex modal phrases. All of this is necessary, a good range of complex structures if you are aiming for those higher band scores. Let me show you a couple of simple examples to show you what I mean. Here, look at the first two sentences. I liked my high school. My teachers were good. You've got two simple sentences there. They're both correct, but they're simple sentences. You could combine those two sentences to make one complex sentence. Think about how you could do that. Look at sentences 3 and 4. My best subject was science. I became a scientist. Again, they're both correct sentences, but they're both simple sentences. How could you combine sentences 3 and 4 to make a complex sentence? Here we go. I liked my high school because my teachers were good. My best subject was science, which is why I became a scientist. So you can see here how these 4 simple sentences have been combined into 2 complex sentences. And using a variety of different types of complex sentences, as well as some simple sentences, will help you to get those higher band scores. All right, so let's have a look then at academic writing task 1. And the key questions I'm going to answer are, what skills do you have to demonstrate to get those higher band scores, band 7 and above, and what are the big mistakes that you should avoid? Well, in academic task 1, you have to summarize information that's presented to you visually in a graph, a table, chart, or a diagram. Now, this is basically an information transfer task. In other words, you are given a picture, a visual, and you have to describe that in sentences. Now, you can should only spend about 20 minutes on this task. And remember that you have to write at least 150 words in about 20 minutes. Now, this is where I ask, how many words do you write on a line on average? Do you know? For most people, it's somewhere between maybe 8 and 12 words on a line. If you don't know, then after this webinar, I'd like you to find out, okay? Because let's say, for example, you know you write 10 words on a line on average. Then on test day, in task 1, you've got to write at least 150 words. So if you write at least 15 lines, then you should have written the minimum. Now, I recommend you aim for about 170, maybe 180 words. So about 17 to 18 lines. So on test day, just count the number of lines. And if you've written about 17, 18 lines, then you know that you've written enough. You definitely don't want to lose marks for not writing enough. Now, here on the screen, you can see a typical academic task 1 graph, and you'll see this in your booklet as well on page 4. Remember that the format of the academic task 1 question is always the same. So it always tells you spend about 20 minutes on this task. And it always says to you, summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Look at this graph here, cinema attendance by age group. It says the graph gives information about cinema attendance in Australia between 1998 and the present, with projections to 2018. Now, imagine you've come in here today and you're going to write this academic task 1. Now, the first thing I want you to do is look at that graph, think about it, and try to pick out the most important information, because you don't want to write about every single thing you see. What is most important about this graph? Now, let me give you a clue. There's usually about 4 important features. Not exactly, but around about 4 features that are important. Something else, anytime you have a range of dates, here it's from 1998 to 2018. When you have a range of dates, I want you to compare the beginning and the end and ask yourself, what is the general trend? Now, when I say trend, I don't mean fashion and clothes. Trend means a change in the data. How is the data changing from 1998 to 2018? Is it increasing, decreasing, or fluctuating? Fluctuating means going up and down, okay? And I think you can agree that generally it shows an increasing trend. Cinema attendance is increasing for all 4 age groups, right? So that has to be the most important feature that you see. Second, I can hear people out there saying, yes, but Marilyn, look at the green line. At the end of the green line, it's going down. Right, well done. Anytime you see something that goes opposite the general trend, that's important too. So your second important point, I think, is there's a recent decline in cinema attendance for the 25 to 34-year-old age group. What else do you notice? Well, third, the red line. It's been the highest throughout. That's the 14 to 24-year-olds. So they have the highest attendance throughout. And look at the gold line at the bottom. The over 50-year-olds has the lowest attendance throughout. So right there, you've picked out approximately the 4 most important features in that graph. Now, talking about that 50-year-old gold line, the lowest attendance throughout, this is where a lot of people would make a big mistake, and they try to explain why, what they think is the reason behind the data. They might say things like, well, people over 50 are old and lazy and they don't like to go to the cinema because they're too lazy and they sit at home on the sofa eating chips and watching TV or something. No, don't do that. Don't do that. You don't want to explain why. Academic task 1 is a descriptive task. It's only describing what you see, not what you think. We don't want to know what you think in academic task 1 writing. You're going to tell us that in the task 2 essay. All right, so you've done that. So let us then go on, and I'm going to give you 3 really good rules how to write an excellent academic task 1. 3 rules. So here's a good approach. First of all, you're going to write an introduction sentence that says what, where, and when. Secondly, highlight the key features with figures. And third, write an overview. Let me explain what I mean. Look at the introduction then, first of all. Write an introduction, 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences, that says what, where, and when. Look at my example in the blue. The graph compares what? The level of cinema going of 4 age groups. Where? In Australia. When? From 1998 to 2018. So right there, I've written a 1, maybe a 2 sentence introduction. Now, the 2 big mistakes that we see here that will lose you marks. First big mistake, a lot of people just copy the question from the question booklet instead of using their own words. Now, if you do that, you need to know that if you copy that sentence, those words will not count in the 150 words, and you're in danger of losing marks for not writing enough. Secondly, another big mistake, a lot of people just don't write an introduction sentence at all. They just start describing the data, and that's a big mistake. The introduction sentence sets the context for what you're going to write next. Let's do a quick poll here, because my second rule is to do with using figures in academic task 1. So if you don't include figures in your academic task 1 essay, what's the highest score you think you can get for task achievement? Do you think it's a band 5, 6, 7, or 8? Put your score in now, please, and I'll come back to those results shortly. Let's go on then to my second rule, which is to highlight the key features with figures. Let's look at my example here in the green box. I'm not going to read all of it, but I just want you to notice how I've used the figures, the percentages, to support my key ideas. The popularity of the cinema has grown since 1994 for all age groups, with the increase ranging from just over 5% for 14 to 24-year-olds, 90% to a projected 96%, to around 25% for the 35 to 49-year-olds, etc. But you see how I'm using the figures, using the percentages to support my key points. Now, that's really important that you do that. Now, the data might be given to you in percentages, like it is here, or it could be in a range of different units of measurement. So if it's to do with weight, the units could be kilograms or tons. If it's to do with distance, the units might be kilometers or miles. So different units of measurement. Notice whether the units are in hundreds, thousands, millions, or billions. You will lose big marks if your figures are not accurate. So, for example, if you see that the population in the graph, maybe you have a graph about the population in Canada, and if the graph shows the population in Canada is 34 million, but you write the population in Canada was 34,000, you'll lose some big marks for that. So your figures, your data must be accurate. But you don't have to report exact figures. You can use the language of approximation. So you can say things like just over 5%, around 25%, over 80%, almost 60%, to round the numbers up or down. Let's go back to that poll, see what your answers were today. If you don't include figures in your academic task 1 essay, the highest score you can get for task achievement, yes, it is a band 5. Well done. Exactly half of today's audience was exactly right. You cannot get above a band 5 if you don't use any figures, if they give you figures in the academic task 1. So very important. that you do that. Let's go on to another poll, because this one relates to my third important rule for academic task 1. If you don't include an overview in your academic task 1 essay, what's the highest score you can get for task achievement? Is it band 5, 6, 7, or 8? Put your score in now, please. Put your answer in, and I'll come back to that very shortly. And let's talk about the overview, because this is my third important rule for writing an excellent academic task 1. Always write an overview. What is an overview? Well, think of this as the most important information, very brief, very concise. Look at my example here in the orange box. Overall, despite fluctuations, there has been a steady upward trend in cinema going in Australia, although the recent decline in the 25 to 34-year-old age group is expected to continue. And here you can see I've summarized the most important information from the graph or chart. Let's do practice then here. Go back to that poll. If you don't include an overview in your academic task 1 writing, what is the highest score you can get for task achievement? The best answer is band 5. So 47% of today's audience was correct. If you don't write an overview, you cannot get above a band 5. So you can see how important it is to write that overview. My masterclass advice for academic task 1. Let's think about those big mistakes. First of all, not supporting the description with figures. If you don't use the numbers, the figures, that is a big mistake. You must use the figures for support. Another big mistake is describing every small piece of information. Don't do that. Pick out the most important information from the graph or chart and write about that. Another big mistake is trying to interpret or explain why, explaining the reasons behind the data. Don't do that. Remember, academic task 1, we don't want to know what you think. Simply describe what you see. Another big mistake is not writing an overview of the information. Remember, you must write an overview to get above a band 5 in task achievement. The overview is the summary of the most important information in that graph or chart. Now, sometimes academic task 1 is a bit different, and it might be a process writing where you will have a series of pictures or a diagram, and you have to explain a process. So how to do something. So for example, how bees make honey. You still have to write an overview. And what would the overview be like in a process? Well, in the overview, you would say how many steps there are in the process and what those important steps are. For example, let me give you a super easy example because I love chocolate. Let's say you have to write about how to make a chocolate cake. In your overview, you might say there are 4 important steps in making a chocolate cake. First, collect the ingredients. Secondly, mix them together. Third, bake in the oven. And finally, enjoy eating. And that would be your overview, a summary of how many steps there are and what those steps are. Remember, if it's a process, you've got to use words that show the order, the sequence of the steps. So use words, linking words like first, next, after that, and finally. Remember, you cannot eat your cake before you've made it. So use linking words to show the order of the steps. And that, as I think you know now, is rated under coherence and cohesion. Very briefly then, my masterclass checklist for academic task 1. Write at least 150 words. I recommend about 170 to 180 words. Write an overview. Select the most important information. Support your points with examples, figures. Make some good comparisons between the data if you can. Use those linking words to connect your ideas. Organize it into paragraphs. Now for task 1, you should write more than one paragraph. You might want to have a very brief introduction paragraph with the introduction 1 or 2 sentences and your overview, a paragraph with the detail supporting your main points, and a brief conclusion. But you should have more than one paragraph even in task 1 writing. And then at the end, leave a few minutes to check for mistakes in grammar and spelling. And if you do that, you should write an excellent task 1. Please remember, for academic task 1 writing, you have to write a report. It has to be a report. So everything must be written in complete sentences, organized into paragraphs. No lists, no bullet points, no 1, 2, 3, no A, B, C, none of that. No headings, no subheadings. Let's go on then to general training task 1, and I'm going to start with a quick poll. General training task 1, you have to write a letter. Again, you've got to write at least 150 words in 20 minutes. In GT, General Training Task 1, you're given a situation that you have to respond to. So, for example, you might have to give your opinion about something and suggest a course of action. Maybe you bought the new iPhone and you're dissatisfied with it. You have to write a letter complaining and saying what you want the manager to do. Or maybe you're going to write a letter inviting a friend to come and stay with you and suggesting things that you can do when your friend arrives. So in the general training task 1, they will always give you the situation and 3 bullet points. So my first poll question for you is this: if you don't cover all 3 bullet points in that GT task 1 letter, what's the highest score you can get for task achievement? Can you put your score in now? You think it's band 4, 5, 6, or 7? And I'll come back to that shortly. Here we have a typical GT task 1. It says, you have heard about plans to build new apartments in a public park near your home. You want to give your opinion about this. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper. In your letter, now here are the 3 bullet points that I mentioned. Explain how you learned about these plans. Say what you think of the park. Give your opinion on the plans. And begin your letter as follows: Dear Sir or Madam. The first thing you've got to do is to analyze that task carefully. Make sure you fully understand what you have to do to cover all parts of the task. Now, a big mistake that a lot of people make is not writing about all 3 of those bullet points. A lot of people will write about 2 of them and forget about the 3rd one. Very important that you write about all 3 bullet points. Now, I would recommend that you make it super easy for the examiner to see that you've written about all 3 bullet points. And you might even want to write about the same number of lines, more or less, for each of the 3 bullet points. Also, you must make the purpose of writing the letter clear. Why are you writing the letter? Are you asking for information? Are you giving some suggestions? Are you complaining? Make it very, very clear why you are writing, your purpose. Now, generally in a business letter, you'll express the purpose immediately at the beginning of your letter. If you're writing a more informal letter to family or friends, you'll usually ask a little bit, write a little bit about how are you, I hope you're doing well, and then express the purpose. But you must make the purpose very clear. Now, the other thing that's very important with general training task 1 is you have to know what type of letter you're writing. Are you writing a formal business letter, or are you writing a more informal letter to family and friends? You've got to be clear about that before you begin writing. What about this example here? You're writing a letter to the editor of your local newspaper. So this would be what type of letter? Yeah, it would be a more formal business type letter. So you would begin writing, "Dear Sir or Madam," and how would you finish that letter? It has to be formal, doesn't it? So you could say something like, "Yours sincerely," "Yours faithfully," "Yours truly." So one of those would be good to end a business letter. And everything in that letter would be written in a more formal tone or style. In contrast, if you are writing an informal letter to a family member or a friend, the letter will begin "Dear ... and you'll just make up a name, "Dear Mohammed," "Dear Susan." You put that in at the beginning. You write your letter in a more informal way, and then you end your letter informally as well. Best wishes, love, something like that, okay? It's very important that you choose the appropriate style, formal or informal, and be the same, be consistent throughout. Don't mix formal and informal. Let's go back then to that poll, I think. Coming up in just a moment, not quite ready yet. I'll come to it in a moment. Let's have a look then at a sample General Training Task 1 letter. Now this one was awarded a 7.5, and the weakest element in this essay was lexical resource, the vocabulary area. There are errors in word choice in this letter. So for example, in paragraph 1, it says, "It is Mohammed." Other errors in here. One of the fans of your newspaper. Fans is not quite right. You might say subscriber, one of the subscribers to your newspaper. There are other lexical errors in here as well that mean that the overall rating for this letter was not a band 8. A little later in the letter there, it refers to amusing facilities. That's in paragraph 1, 2, 3. In paragraph 3, amusing facilities. It would be better to say entertaining facilities, and so on. Let's go back. I think we may have the poll results coming in now. Yes, we do. So if you don't cover all 3 bullet points in your task 1 letter, what is the highest score you can get for task achievement. Yes, absolutely right. You cannot get above a band 4 if you don't cover all 3 bullet points. Well done, 52% of the audience today were correct. So you can see how important it is to cover those all 3 of those bullet points. There is another example in your Masterclass webinar writing pack. On page 9, I believe it is, you've got another GT Task 1 letter, sample task there. And page 10, you have a sample essay, a sample letter there, band 6, for you to look at the end of this webinar. So my masterclass advice then for the general training task 1 letter is use the appropriate style in your letter, either formal business letter or a more informal style. And then write in the same style throughout. Don't copy words from the question booklet, because remember, those words are not counted in the 150 words and you're in danger of losing marks for not writing enough. Start the letter exactly as it tells you to in the question booklet. Don't waste time writing your address at the top of the letter. That really is a waste of your time. And as I've said, make sure you end the letter in an appropriate way. Or if it's a business letter, you would end yours sincerely or yours faithfully. If it's a letter to family or friends, you could say best wishes, regards, or love. And if you do that, you should write a very good general training task 1 letter. Now, we're going to look at task 2, the task 2 essay. I'm going to give some examples first from academic task 2 and then some examples from general training task 2. But basically, the information I'm going to share about academic task 2 is the same as for general training task 2. As I've said, the task 2 essay counts for 2/3 of your writing mark. So make sure you spend about 40 minutes doing it. But please don't start writing immediately. Analyze the question carefully first. Make sure you know how many parts there are to the question that you have to write about. Now I'm going to look at a few different topics, but each one has a slightly different approach that you need to take. Let's look at the first one here. It says, university graduates can earn more than less well-educated members of the community, so it is fair for them to pay the full cost of their own studies. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? Another way to say that is, do you agree or disagree with this statement? And then the instructions are always the same. Give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge and experience. So my question is, how many parts are there to this question that you need to answer? And in fact, there's really only one thing that you have to say. You have to give your opinion, whether you agree or disagree. Now, to fully answer the question in task 2, I'd like you to look at page 18. Look at the assessment criteria for task 2. The column, first column on the left, the task response column, look at band 7. It says addresses all parts of the task. Now that's important. Those of you aiming for those higher band scores, band 7 and above, you have to be sure that you analyze the question and you write about all the different parts of the test to get that band 7 or above. Now, in this question, to what extent do you agree or disagree? You've really only got one thing to say. You could completely 100% agree and write about that, or you could completely 100% disagree and explain why, or you could partly agree and say why, and partly disagree and say why. Okay? But to answer this question, you've really only got the one thing to say. You have to write at least 250 words in 40 minutes. Now, as we discussed before, let's say you average 10 words on a line, on average, then for this essay, you would count, make sure you've written at least 25 lines. Now, I would recommend 27, 28 lines, so that you've written about 270, maybe 280 words. Let's look at another topic. Some people say that university students should pay the full cost of their education. Others say that university education should be free. Discuss both these views and give your own opinion. Again, same strategy here. Analyze the question and ask yourself, how many parts are there in this question that I have to answer to get that band 7 or above in task response? How many parts are there? Yeah, exactly right. There are 3 things you have to write about. You have to write about, first, that some people say university students should pay the full cost of their education. Second, you've got to say that some people say that university education should be free, and here's why. And third, you've got to give your own opinion and say why. So that's 3 things you've got to write about here to try to get that band 7 or above in task response. You've got to give good reasons and support for each of those 3 main ideas. Thinking about how to paragraph this, in this particular case, you would probably write 5 paragraphs. You're not always going to write 5 paragraphs. It depends how many parts there are to the question. Here you've got 3 parts to the question. So that's 3 body paragraphs. And you must always begin with a separate introduction paragraph and a separate conclusion paragraph. So here I think you probably would have 5 paragraphs to answer this essay question. Let's look at general training task 2. Again, you have to write an essay here. Again, you've got to write at least 250 words. Again, you've got 40 minutes. Really, the only difference between general training and academic task 2 is that on general training task 2, the topics are a little bit more practical and everyday, a little bit less academic, if you like. And it's quite typical to have 2 questions to answer in GT task 2. But our strategy is the same. Read the question, think about it, make sure you know how many parts there are that you have to write about to get that band 7 or above in task response. Let's look at it. In many countries, people are eating more and more unhealthy food and taking less exercise. What do you think are the causes of this problem, and what can be done about it? How many parts are there to this question? People usually tell me 2. My answer to that is, well, okay, but each of the 2 parts has 2 parts to it. So in other words, there are really 4 things you have to write about. the causes or the reasons why people are eating more and more unhealthy food, the reasons why people are taking less exercise, the solutions to people eating more and more unhealthy food, and the solutions to, I'm sorry, I'm laughing there, and the solutions to people taking less and less exercise. I'm laughing at my moderator there. I think he's eating a chocolate bar or some unhealthy food. So there are 4 things you've got to write about here to get that band 7 or above. Looking at the band descriptors on page 18, also I'd like you to look at band 5. Look at band 5 under task response. Addresses the task only partially. If you write about only half of the essay question, you won't get above a band 5 in task response. So you can see how important it is to think about the question and be sure how many parts there are that you have to write about. Let me summarize then my masterclass advice for you, highlighting the writing skills that the examiners are looking for and emphasizing the common mistakes that I want you to avoid in this part of the test. First of all, divide up your time according to the weighting of the marks. So 20 minutes on task 1, 40 minutes on task 2. But you can write the tasks in either order, whatever you feel most comfortable doing. As we've just practiced, analyze the question carefully. Make sure you know how many parts you have to write about, and make sure you write about all those parts to try and get that band 7 or above in task response. Before you begin writing, you have to decide on your position. Your position means what you think about the topic. Now, it's possible you may never have thought about the topic before, okay? If that happens, you've got to decide what you think about it before you begin writing. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Nobody's going to check your facts nobody's going to check your opinions, your facts in the task 2 essay, but you've got to be very clear what you think about the topic before you begin writing. And I want you to express your position clearly in the introduction paragraph, and support that opinion all the way through the essay with good examples, good support, good evidence, and repeat your opinion again in the conclusion. Make sure the examiner knows exactly what you believe about that topic. Use a good variety of linking words to connect your ideas and sequence your ideas. Organize your ideas into paragraphs. Now, I want to pause just a moment and talk about paragraphs a little bit more. Paragraphing your task 2 essay is really, really important. Couple things I want to say. Make it very clear for the examiner to see your paragraphs. I recommend you do 2 things. Indent at the beginning of each paragraph. When I say indent, I mean leave space at the beginning of the first line in each paragraph, and leave a blank line between your paragraphs. That makes it easy for the examiner to see that you've written your essay in paragraphs, okay? The other thing that's important is one paragraph should have one main idea. Express the main idea clearly in a main idea or topic sentence, and all of the sentences in that paragraph should support that one main idea. So each paragraph then will have a clear focus. If you look at page 18, look at coherence and cohesion, and look at band 5. The last bullet point says, may not write in paragraphs, or paragraphing may be inadequate. So if you don't use paragraphs in your task 2 essay, you cannot get above a band 5 in coherence and cohesion. So you see how important it is to paragraph your essay. Please remember, no bullet points, no lists, no ABC, no 1, 2, 3, no notes, no headings, no subheadings, no titles, no subtitles, none of that, okay? Everything should be written in sentences, organized into paragraphs. Use a good variety of vocabulary, a range of grammatical sentences, simple and complex sentences, as we've talked about, and then check your work very carefully at the end. Just spend a few minutes looking for the typical kinds of mistakes that you might make. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it, cross it out, and then just write the word correctly, clearly up above. There are more examples of task 1 and task 2 essays in your writing webinar booklet with examiner scores and examiner comments. So do please take the time after the webinar to go ahead and look at those. I think you'll find them useful. And also up on our website, we've got more practice for you as well. And for those of you that have the time, I'd like to strongly recommend that you do the IDP IELTS Writing Assist, where you can practice writing a sample IELTS writing, task 1 and task 2. Email them in here, and one of our IELTS specialists will mark up your essays and send you a report telling you what you're doing well, but how you can improve. And I think you'll find that extremely useful as you prepare for the test. Questions, again, questions about the writing test this time. Question from Islam. How much would the grammar affect the task? As I've discussed, the examiners are giving you 4 scores for task 1 and 4 scores for task 2. One of those 4 scores for each task is grammar. So it's 25% of task 1 and it's 25% of task 2 that is weighted for grammar. In the academic IELTS essay, it's basically an argumentative essay, isn't it? That's from Abdullah. Yes, it is. You're going to be asked different types of questions. To what extent do you agree or disagree? What are the causes? What are the solutions? What are the problems? These kinds of questions. Remember, in the essay, make sure that you answer each part of the question, fully support it with ideas and opinions. Please give examples of words we should avoid in the writing test. Yes, good question. It's interesting that people are starting to use text language in their essays. Things like ROTFL, right? Roll on the floor laughing, and BTW, by the way. Please don't do this. It's too informal. We'll see the letter U instead of YOU, you know, these kinds of things. It's too informal for an essay. So those are the kinds of things that should be avoided. Question from the questions jump so fast. I see my name there. Thanks a lot for your efforts, Marilyn. Thank you, Abdullah. That's very nice. Is it okay, Nasreen, is it okay to write the overview directly after the introduction? Yes, that's fine. That's in academic task 1. Writing, begin with the introduction, 1 or 2 sentences, and then go into the overview. Actually, you know, you could put the overview in the introduction or in the middle or in the end as a conclusion in academic task 1 writing. My recommendation, though, is to put the overview in the introduction. If you leave it to the end, there's always the danger that you might run out of time, you know, and not have time to write the overview. From the examiner's point of view, they don't mind where the overview is. What's important is there must be an overview somewhere in the academic task 1. So probably best to put it right after the introduction. How can we calculate the number of words? That's from Cameron. I would recommend after this webinar, write something, paragraph or 2, and then figure out what your overall average number of words is per line. And then, as I said, on the test day, you can just count up the number of lines. From Farah, what if I write exactly 250 words in the task 2 essay? That will be fine. Yep, there's no penalty for 250 words. That's fine. I would say that's cutting it a little bit close. You know, my recommendation is aim for 270 to 280 words. Question there from Nahla, name of the link to send you our writing. Io, hello, nice moderator. Io, can you put the link there for the writing assist? Actually, it's on my next slide there, Nahla. Let me just turn over to that next page. Pop up there on the screen. Yes, at the end there you can see the link for reading assist, writing assist, and speaking assist as well. I have a question here from Rima. How many points do I lose if I don't use a lot of vocabulary? Well, you know, it's rated on a scale under lexical resource, as you can see there. In your writing booklet under lexical resource. So basically, the wider your vocabulary, the greater the range of vocabulary, the better, and the greater the accuracy of your vocabulary, the better. And honestly, Rima, the best way to improve in vocabulary is to read as much as you possibly can. So, you know, find interesting material, magazines, newspapers, either print or online, things that you're interested in reading. I think interest is important. Read as much as you can. And for those of you listening out there that don't like reading in any language, try to find something that you're interested in. So if there are football fans out there, well, okay, read about football. You know, whatever you're interested in, I think that's a good place to start. And then beyond that, when you become more familiar with reading, and you can do it rather faster and your vocabulary is increasing, then, you know, start focusing in on current events, articles in magazines, newspapers, and online as well. Running out of time, let me just take a couple more questions. Can we make a group on any of the social media apps so we can practice together? Yes, join our Facebook page, please. We've got the one of the Facebook pages up there. Please do join in there. A question here from Dahlia Richard about handwriting. I think the question is, if my handwriting isn't too good, will it reduce my score? Not really, except that what's important, Dahlia, is the examiner has to be able to read your writing. So write as clearly as you can. If a lot of your words are just not readable, if they're not legible, that will impact your score. So, you know, do please write as clearly as you can. Having said that, you don't have to have beautiful handwriting. It just has to be clear. And if you find any words just don't look clear enough, cross them out and write them again. Question from Amel Al-Tayeb about pie charts. Okay, so academic task 1, pie charts without time frames. What about the verb tense in grammar? So if you're describing a pie chart without time frames, you're probably looking at present tense description there. If there's no time frame. Contrast that with your typical bar graph, for example, or a line graph where you've got dates in the past. Obviously, if you're referring to dates in the past, you're using simple past tense. If you're using phrases like from 1998 or since, you know, you're using present perfect. If you've got dates in the future, you're using future tense, and so on. But generally for the pie charts, you'll be looking at using more present tense. Question there from Abdullah. Yeah, related to using the pronoun I just want to mention in the task 2 essay, the instructions tell you that you can use ideas from your own background and experience. Therefore, it is fine for you. It's okay to use the pronoun I when you're giving your own experience and background as support. I know a lot of university teachers will say in an essay you never use the word I. However, IELTS writing is a little bit different because we do tell you in task 2 essay writing, you can use your own experience and background. Other questions? Amr Talat about the overview, I've answered that one. Question here from John, I think. Should we use a title for academic task 2 essay? No, you don't need to at all. And certainly you must not use subtitles or subheadings in the essay at all. Don't do that. Any extra marks for handwriting? That's from Asia. No, as I said, your handwriting just has to be clear. Edgeman Azar, I think it is. What if we wrote less words? If you write fewer than the minimum number of words, so if you write less than 150 words in task 1 and less than 250 words in task 2, you will get a penalty. You will lose marks. And that's why it's very important to, as I say, aim for around 170, 180 words in task 1, 270, 280 in task 2. Stanislav, examples of words we should avoid in the writing test. I would avoid slang, avoid swear words, avoid texting type language, as I mentioned before. Question from Vedant. Can we include examples? I guess this is task 2 essay. can we include examples that are not entirely true? Like scientists and researchers have found that, blah, 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 to support your stand on the topic. I think it's more genuine to give honest examples and opinions, rather than sort of inventing something. There's always a possibility that it just doesn't sound correct. Having said that, nobody's going to actually check your facts. What's most important is that you clearly express your opinions and fully support them with reasons and examples. I'm going to take one more question and then it's time to close for today. Nuri asks, how many paragraphs should we include in the letter? Can we explain the 3 bullet points in paragraph form? Yes. In the letter, in task 1, definitely you should be writing more than just 1 paragraph. So you probably have an introduction paragraph where you clearly explain your purpose in writing. And then you may want to have 3 paragraphs for each of the 3 bullet points, or you may combine the 3 into 1 paragraph. But very definitely you need to have more than 1 paragraph, even in your task 1 writing. Again, a question from Nuri, do we include the address in the letter? No, don't waste time writing your address at the top. And as I've said before, please, no titles anywhere, no titles, no subtitles, no bullet points, no lists. Everything should be written in sentences combined into paragraphs in both task 1 and task 2 writing, both academic and general training. There are, I think, about 150 more questions, and I am sorry, I just don't have time to answer all of them. Please post your questions to the IDP Facebook page, IDP IELTS Facebook page. I'll go on there tomorrow, and I promise I will answer questions there tomorrow. I want to thank you all very, very much for joining the IDP IELTS webinar this afternoon. My name again is Marilyn Cleland here in the Dubai office. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found this a valuable and useful webinar, that you've learned a lot from it. Please let me know what you think, again on our Facebook page, and I will answer any more of your questions there. Thank you all very much and have a great evening.